My name is Silas, and I've spent my entire life in these hollows, nestled deep within the shadowed folds of the Appalachian mountains. Folks round here, they got a saying, the mountains remember. And they do. They remember the whispers of the wind through the pines, the rumble of rock slides, and the screams that no human ear was ever meant to hear. They remember the old ways, the dark things that predate even the oldest oak, and they hold onto secrets tighter than a miser clutches his last coin. I run a small logging outfit, or what's left of it. The timber business ain't what it used to be, but it keeps me tied to the land, keeps me walking these ancient trails, and keeps me seeing things I wish I could unsee. Most people think Appalachia is just poor folks, moonshine, and pretty scenery. They don't see the deep, clawing darkness that sinks its roots into the very bedrock of these hills. The kind of darkness that births true crime, but not the kind you hear about on the news. This is older, uglier, and it don't leave any witnesses. It started with the disappearances, not just the usual runaways or folks who got lost drunk in the woods. These were different, clean, like they'd simply ceased to exist. First, it was young Bethany May, a sweet girl, with eyes the color of the spring sky. Vanished from her porch swing one humid summer evening. Then, Old Man Hemlock, a hermit who lived so far up the ridge, you'd swear he was kin to the black bears. His cabin was found empty, his pipe still warm in the ashtray, but no sign of him. The county sheriff, a good man named Brody, who'd seen enough mountain madness to fill a library, just shook his head. "It's like the earth just swallowed 'em whole, Silas," he'd grumble, his voice heavy with a weariness that went beyond his years. But the earth don't swallow people whole. Not like that. Not without a trace. I'd seen the fear in Brody's eyes, the same fear that had been creeping into my own heart like a cold tendril of fog, because I knew, we all knew, deep down, that there were things in these mountains that weren't meant to be understood by man. The old-timers, they called them the shadow folk. Not ghosts, not cryptids in the usual sense. Something else. They whispered about figures seen just at the edge of your vision, shapes that moved too fast through the undergrowth, glints of eyes that reflected no light. They were said to be ancient protectors of the mountains, but also ancient hunters, taking what they needed when they needed it. And lately, they'd been needing more. One frigid November, the screams started. High-pitched, desperate wails that cut through the silence of the night like a rusty saw. They didn't come from any particular direction, just seemed to echo from everywhere, from the very air itself. My dogs, two loyal cur-hounds named Bear and Blue, would whine and claw at the doors, their fur bristling, eyes wide with an animal terror I'd never witnessed. I'd grab my rifle, heart pounding like a drum, and peer out into the inky blackness, but there was never anything to see. Just the endless, suffocating darkness and the fading echoes of those unholy cries. The local gossip, fueled by fear and isolation, turned to desperate measures. Folks started talking about sacrifices, not in the biblical sense, but in the old, forgotten ways. Leaving offerings of food, trinkets, even livestock, at the base of certain gnarled ancient trees or in the mouths of secluded caves. Desperate people do desperate things, and when the sheriff had no answers, they turned to the only thing they knew, the unwritten rules of the mountains. I scoffed at it at first, tried to dismiss it as ignorant superstition. I was a modern man after all, with a pickup truck and a cell phone, even if the signal was spotty. But then, my own truck broke down a good 10 miles from the nearest paved road, deep in a forgotten holler I hadn't traversed in years. It was just past dusk, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. I had my tools, figured I could fix it, but as the last sliver of sun dipped behind the western ridge, a sound reached me. Not a scream, not a whistle. It was a rhythmic, almost musical hum, low and resonant, like the vibration of some colossal insect's wings. It seemed to come from the trees themselves, from the ground beneath my feet. My breath hitched in my throat. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, but my feet felt rooted to the muddy ground. The hum grew louder, pulsing, and then I saw them. Not directly, never directly, just glimpses, shadows detaching from the deeper shadows, moving with an unnatural fluidity through the dense woods around me. Taller than any man, gaunt and impossibly thin. Their limbs seemed to ripple and extend. Their eyes, I couldn't make out details, but they were there, reflecting nothing, just hollow voids that seemed to drink in the ambient light. I scrambled into the cab of my truck, fumbling for my phone, knowing there was no signal. But the instinct was primal. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the cold metal. The hum intensified, a low thrum that vibrated in my chest, making my teeth ache. And then, a single guttural sound, like stones grinding together, rose from the darkness, so close it felt like it was right outside my window. I slammed the door lock down, a pathetic gesture against what felt like an unstoppable force. Through the grimy windshield, I saw a shape detach itself from the deepest shadow of a mammoth oak. It moved towards the truck, not walking, but gliding, its form shifting, wavering like heat haze of hot asphalt. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing myself against the seat, trying to become small, invisible. The humming filled the small space of the truck, the air growing heavy, metallic. I could smell something then, a scent that was both sweet and putrid, like rotting wildflowers and fresh blood. It was in the cab with me. I knew it. I could feel the cold radiating from it, pressing in. I held my breath, praying, bargaining with a God I hadn't truly believed in since I was a boy. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, it was gone. The hum faded, the scent dissipated, and the oppressive cold receded. I waited, rigid, for what felt like an eternity, before slowly, cautiously, opening my eyes. The woods were silent once more, the only sound the frantic hammering of my own heart. I started the truck. It turned over on the first try. I drove out of that holler like a man possessed, the headlights carving a frantic path through the darkness. I didn't stop until I reached the paved road, and even then, I sped all the way home, not daring to look in my rearview mirror. That night changed me. I stopped scoffing. I started listening. The offerings continued, and for a while, the disappearances seemed to slow. A fragile peace settled over the hollers, a tense quiet that everyone knew could shatter at any moment. But the unspoken truth was, we were paying tribute. We were acknowledging them, the shadow folk, the ancient masters of these mountains. Then came the summer of the whistling man. It started subtly, a strange, off-key whistling, heard drifting from the deeper woods around dusk. It wasn't a human whistle. It was too pure, too melodic, yet utterly devoid of warmth. It had a hollow, mournful quality, like the wind playing through a hollow bone, and it always seemed to follow the children. Little Billy Jenkins, a shy boy who rarely strayed from his yard, started talking to an invisible friend who whistled. His parents, worried, dismissed it as childish imagination. Then, Billy went missing. His dog was found whimpering by the creek, its leash snapped, a single, small wooden whistle carved into the shape of a bird lying next to it. No one knew where it came from. Panic set in. The sheriff put out warnings, telling parents to keep their children indoors after dark. But the whistling continued, closer now, sometimes right outside windows, a chilling serenade that promised an unspeakable end. One evening, I was sitting on my porch, shotgun across my lap, watching the sun bleed out of the sky. My neighbor, old Martha, had her grandkids visiting, and I could hear their innocent laughter drifting across the valley. Then the whistling started, low at first, then rising in pitch, circling the valley like a predator. Martha's laughter died, replaced by a desperate, frantic cry. I was up and running before I even thought about it. My legs, old and stiff, carried me faster than I thought possible. I burst through the tree line separating our properties. The whistling now a piercing shriek. Martha was standing frozen on her porch, her face pale, eyes wide with terror, staring at the edge of the woods. Her youngest grandchild, little Lily, no more than 4 years old, was toddling towards the darkness, her tiny hand outstretched. "Lily, no!" Martha screamed, her voice cracking. But Lily seemed mesmerized, drawn by an unseen force. The whistling was directly in front of her now, a tangible presence. And then I saw it. Just a glimpse, but enough. A shadow, darker than the fading light, taller than any man, standing at the very edge of the tree line, its form indistinct, shifting. Its hand, long and slender, ended in unnaturally sharp points, and it was reaching for Lily. I raised my shotgun and fired. The roar ripped through the valley, shattering the whistling, tearing a hole in the thick air. The shadow recoiled, dissolving back into the deeper woods, with a sound like dry leaves scattering in a sudden gust of wind. Lily stumbled, crying, and Martha rushed to scoop her up, clutching her tight. We stood there, gasping, shaking, as the silence of the mountains descended once more, heavier and more menacing than before. The sheriff arrived minutes later, drawn by the gunshot. He looked at the shattered porch light, the fear etched on our faces, and the raw, terrified cries of Lily. He didn't ask what I saw. He just nodded, his gaze sweeping over the dark woods, a deep, knowing sorrow in his eyes. After that, things got worse. The shadow folk, or whatever they were, seemed angered by my intervention. The disappearances accelerated. It wasn't just children anymore. Whole families vanished, leaving behind untouched meals, open books, and an emptiness that felt like a gaping wound in the community. The fear became a palpable thing, a suffocating blanket that settled over every cabin, every holler. We became prisoners in our own homes after dark, the sound of crickets replaced by the strained silence of a land holding its breath. One day, Brody came to my door. His face was gaunt, his eyes bloodshot. He held a crumpled flyer in his hand. It was for a distant job opportunity, something about surveying timber up north. He offered me a spot, said it was a chance to get out, start fresh. He knew what I had seen, what we were all living with. He was offering an escape. I looked around my small, familiar home, the walls lined with hunting trophies and faded family photos. This land, these mountains, were in my blood. They were part of me, as much as my own bones, and I knew, with a terrible certainty, that I couldn't leave. "No, Brody," I said, my voice hoarse. "I can't. This is my home." He looked at me, a profound sadness in his eyes, but also a flicker of understanding. "I figured as much, Silas." He turned to leave, then paused. "Just be careful. They're getting bolder." He left, and I watched his patrol car disappear down the winding dirt road, kicking up dust that hung in the still air like a shroud. That night, I didn't sit on my porch. I sat inside, the old shotgun loaded and by my side, the windows shuttered tight. But the shutters offered no comfort. The hum returned, fainter than before, but insistent, like a thought trying to burrow its way into my mind. And then I heard it. Not a whistle, not a scream, but a sound I hadn't heard since I was a child. A sound that froze the blood in my veins, my own name. Silas. It was my mother's voice, clear as day, calling from the darkness outside. My mother, who had been dead and buried for 15 years. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate to escape. It was them, I knew it. They were trying to lure me out. They were trying to break me. Silas, come out, son. It's cold out here. My hand tightened on the shotgun. Every instinct screamed at me to answer, to open the door, to see her. But the chill in the air, the subtle wrongness of the voice, even as it perfectly mimicked my mother's, held me captive. I stood there, rigid, listening to my dead mother call my name from the darkness. The humming intensified, a low thrum that vibrated through the floorboards, through the very bones of the house. It was a siren song, a predator's lure, and I felt myself swaying, drawn by the terrible longing to see her face one last time. Then, a subtle shift. The voice changed, just for a flicker, a deeper resonance beneath the familiar tone, a hint of something ancient and malevolent. It wasn't my mother. It was something that wore her voice like a stolen skin. I jammed my fingers into my ears, squeezing my eyes shut, trying to drown out the sound. I rocked back and forth, chanting under my breath, anything to break the spell. Not real, not real, not real. The calling continued, persistent, relentless, until the first sliver of dawn painted the eastern sky. Then, like all the other horrors, it receded. The humming faded, the voice vanished, and the terrible pressure in the air lifted. I didn't sleep that night, or many nights after. I've become a ghost in my own home, a man haunted by the silence, by the fear of what the mountains hold. The disappearances still happen, less frequently perhaps. Or maybe we've just learned to ignore them, to accept them as part of the price of living here. The locals still leave their offerings, their desperate pleas to be spared. And sometimes, late at night, I hear the distant, mournful whistling, a reminder that the shadow folk are still out there, still watching, still waiting. I'm writing this down because I need someone to know. I need someone to understand what truly lurks in these ancient Appalachian hills. It ain't just bears and rattlesnakes, or even your garden variety serial killers. It's something far worse, something that preys on your deepest longings and wears the faces of your loved ones. And it remembers everything. I don't know when my time will come, but I know it will. I can feel the mountains watching, a cold, hungry gaze. And sometimes, when the wind howls just right through the gaps in my old cabin, I swear I can hear a low, familiar hum and a whisper of my own name, carried on the breeze. It's not a question, it's a promise. And it's a promise these mountains always keep.